Here's an application of a proportion. In this example, we have suppose that in an effort to estimate the number of bears in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, 80 bears were tagged and then released. Later, 120 bears were sampled, and it was found that 6 of them had tags. Approximately how many bears were in the park? So the first thing we have to do is set up our proportion, which is a ratio equal to another ratio. And the key thing with proportions is to make sure that your units line up. Your numerator units must match and your denominator units must match. So let's see here. It says later 120 bears were sampled and it was found that 6 of them had tags. So I would set this up as our first ratio here. 120 of them were sampled at the later time, and it was found that 6 of those were tagged. We can make that our first ratio. And then for the second ratio, since tagged is the units for the denominator of our first ratio, we want to make sure that tagged is also the units in the denominator of the second ratio. So we want to have the number of bears that were tagged initially in the denominator of our second ratio here, which was 80. 80 were tagged initially. And then we're trying to solve for how many bears were in the park, and we should just let that be x. So x, total bears in the park. So there's a good proportion. 120 over 6 equals x over 80. We can get rid of the words and just call it 120 over 6 equals x over 80. And then to isolate x, all that has to be done is, to get rid of this 80 in the denominator, multiply both sides by 80. So if we just multiply on both sides by 80, the 80s cancel from the right side, and we just get x. So x equals... and then take your calculator, and I'll do this the same here, and it's going to be 80 multiplied by 120, so 80 times 120, and then divided by 6, and I got 1,600. So there are approximately 1,600 bears in the park according to this calculation, and you could write it as a sentence here. There are approximately 1,600 or 1,600 bears in the park. So there was an example of an application of a proportion.